That's fine.
I just told our boss that we're the party. He said, yeah, you two sit next to each other. We're the party.
Yeah.
We will keep you going.
I like it.
We like to learn stuff. I'm just curious, not that I'm going to leave, but it was business supports and how to use them.
Uh-huh.
And none of them really look.
That's okay. You know, I think that especially with younger children, the idea of volunteerism can seem so far off.
Right.
That it kind of makes sense. So I appreciate you guys coming, and we'll just kind of have a little exploration into how I think of volunteerism, and then we'll go from there. So we can keep it pretty open and kind of keep it dialogue-y. So I don't mind being interrupted. I adjust really well to in the moment, so you don't have to like hold questions till the end or anything. If you want to talk about something, especially since we're such a small group, jump in and shout out, and then we'll just start talking. Sound good to everyone? Yeah. Awesome. So my name is Mark Malady. I work for an organization called High Sierra Industries in Reno, Nevada. And we work across the lifespan from 18 months until the end of life. We have programs and services that are tailored around that. Primarily lately, I've been focused on the development of a womb-to-tomb assessment called the Generate Assessment that tries to look at what are the skills involved in being a human being and being able to understand unique skill presentations for every person that's ever lived. That's my goal. I'm an autistic adult. In my younger years, I engaged in pretty intense physical aggression that included me being tossed out of my third grade classroom. And then my mom had to move schools because she didn't like the perception that my teachers were putting that one event on me. And then in fourth grade, I had a really amazing teacher, and I met my first friend in life. And through that experience, I decided to stop pretending like I didn't understand things, and then I was identified for gifted and talented. So I was a very early version of a twice exceptional learner. Back then, they didn't really know what to do with them. They still honestly don't really know what to do with twice exceptional learners. It's still an area of weakness for us. But then ever after that third grade event, I never resorted to physical aggression again. But I got really good at hurting people with my words. And I spent a lot of my 20s learning, just because I'm good at something doesn't mean I have to use that skill. And I ended up working with adults with severe self-injury and severe physical aggression accidentally when I was doing my undergraduate, because I drunkenly signed up for a class that was a work experience class. And it was working in a day rehabilitation program with the last people to be deinstitutionalized in the state of Nevada. And I worked with a man that would engage in bite attempts about 40 to 50 times per hour, and he had several transmutable diseases, so his bites were really, really dangerous. But I ended up falling in love with that guy, and I saw parts of myself in him that I easily understood how I could have become him if things were different. And that started my passion of working with severe aggression. And so I kind of went down that road for many years and worked with severe aggression. I worked in 24-hour homes, state institutions, schools, pretty much anything that you can think of. And from there, I got more and more into this idea that, hey, the skills that people have and the way that they leverage those skills makes or breaks the experience. So one tiny skill can make a fundamental difference in your life. And oftentimes what our task as support network, professionals, friends, colleagues is really about supporting a person who has autism, is really about creating experience and allowing for those skills a person has to create authentic connection with that experience. So volunteerism is one of the ways that I think we underutilize experience right now. I think everyone in here is a professional, not a family member. Am I picking up on that vibe correctly? Both. Okay, cool. So I'm comfortable jumping back and forth between both, so if you want to talk one perspective or the other, just let me know. But I'm very comfortable with approaching the idea of volunteerism from both. The PowerPoint's a little more set up for talking about it from family perspective, but we can easily move that into talking about it from the professional perspective that's relevant for wherever you guys are at too. So don't hesitate in asking questions from either of those perspectives. So I think when we tried to think about the question of an individual person, whether it's your child or a person that you're supporting, and we think, hey, where are they going to go and who are they going to be? Does anyone ever feel like that's a crazy question to ask? Who will this person be in 20 years? Who will this person be in 30 years? Say that again?
I feel like it's just a normal thing that you think about with any child.
It's a normal thing that we think about with our children.
Maybe I don't think we can put an answer to any of it for
Yeah.
everybody, but we still wonder.
We wonder that question all the time. I think about like looking out into space. Like, yeah, we're asking cool questions. But if we get too bought into any one narrative, we're going to be hurt, right? So even if you have a typically functioning child and you have the narrative that, hey, they're going to go to college and they're going to become a professor because my dad was a medical professor and I'm a medical professor and that's what they're going to do. The second that you start limiting a box around a child, all you're going to have is pain. Pain for them and pain for yourself. When we ask that question of what are they going to become, I like to open it to how would I feel if they become A? How would I feel if they become a professor? How would I feel if they become a really good father? How would I feel if they become a video gamer who lives in my basement for the rest of their life and has a super connected community of friends who live all across the world? How would I, as the parent, feel? And so framing our questions can help us not create boxes around our children and around what we think a good, meaningful life is. And when we kind of zoom out and we look at the data, I like this graphic because I think it shows diversity in a really concrete way. There's 7 billion people in the world, and we ask, what do all those people do, right? They do all sorts of different things. We know that intuitively. And would we say that, hey, if you're part of that 1.7 billion who work in services, that you're better or worse than the 800 million who work in industrial jobs? No, you're just a person. But we give weight to this idea of what people do and how they spend their time. And then we go back and we judge ourselves, or we judge our child, or we judge the person that we support based on where they end up. It's a very American thing to do.
I learned that working some years ago with a gentleman who was from Spain,
Yeah.
who said to me that was the one thing that annoyed him when he first moved here, was that people would ask him, what do you do? And he was like, as if what I do defines who I am. Because he was like, in his country, he was like, nobody cares what you do for a living.
Yeah.
That's not, like, nobody really cares. Like, that's not something that comes up as one of the first questions people ask you. It's something you might learn about somebody, like, down the road, but he's like, it doesn't have any bearing on anything. But in America, it's always like, what do you do? Your name, what do you do?
Yeah, so in different cultures, there's different emphasis on what makes you a good or a bad person. Because really what's at like the heart of that question is, what do you do? It's how much should I value your input? And to boil everything down to how much should you value somebody's input based on how they make their money is a really strange thing to do, right? And to pretend that we understand somebody because we know what they do for work is also a really strange thing to do. We don't know how they are as a child. We don't know how they are as a loved one. We don't know how they are as a parent. We don't know how they treat somebody when they're walking down the street. You have no idea with that limited amount of information. As parents and professionals, we get access to an insane amount of information about people. Sometimes I would argue too much, and HIPAA and FERPA exists to protect and secure information, but a big part of that isn't really implemented to its fullest extent yet. And I think in the next 10 to 20 years, you're going to see a lot of regulators get more on people about this. But its document destruction is an inherent part of both of those laws. And how long you retain information, if you're retaining information for too long, you're actually in violation of HIPAA. Does that make sense to everybody? So if you provided services to somebody 10 years ago, and you still have their box of their records in storage, you're actually breaking the law. That has to be destroyed along with its timeline. That timeline changes state by state. I actually don't know Illinois', but in Nevada, we're at 5 years. And so if you're holding on to it from 5 years from the last point of service, you're actually out of violation. And part of that is because old information can hold people back. It can limit people. It can hurt people. Just because somebody engaged in aggression 5 years ago doesn't mean that you should be walking next to them in a way that's securing yourself, because you're alienating them by engaging with that historical information. So I like to think about the idea of assessment and skill sets not like an individual roadmap with one destination, but like a crazy spaghetti bowl, right? You can go many places, many different ways. And the more comfortable that we feel with navigating a person's skills and abilities in the context of what's important to them, the better that we can navigate what their options are, and we can give them informed choice. So when we think about meaningful outcomes for adulthood, we can ask the question, what are the top 5 important outcomes that you have for your child by the time they are 30, 50, and at the end of their life? And then we need to also ask the question is, what are the top 5 important outcomes that your child has for themselves for 30, 50, and at the end of their life? This is really hard, because where the parent's advocacy and vision for their child stops to have legal power and authority is oftentimes a lot later than when the child's skills and abilities start to allow them to create their own vision, right? So an example of this is when I was 17 years old, I graduated high school, and I had my IEP, and I wanted my IEP closed, and I didn't want it transferred to my community college. My mom disagreed with that. She was worried that the excess workload of college would be a bit too much for me, and that if I needed it, I should be able to lean on supports. Well, my mom was my legal guardian, so she had the right to transfer my information to the community college. I got blackout drunk and lit it on fire because I thought that would solve the problem. No, that's not how that works. So my mom ended up giving my supports to my community college, and I felt like their knowledge of that was going to hold back my opportunity. And we had a disagreement on what outcomes, right, in that moment were relevant to me. But the legal precedent was very clear. My mom had the right and the power and the control. I did not have the right, the power, and the control. As we move into adulthood, especially in our services, it can become blurry about where that power, control, and decision-making lies. Now, most states have moved to an informed decision-making model where adult guardianship through the courts is very regulated, and that there's a lot of structure that has to be in place. But the practicalities of unrolling that have been really bumpy. So like in the state of Nevada, even though if you are not the legal guardian and you haven't gone through the court, a family member has no decision-making capabilities, the practicality of when mom is sitting in the person's ear telling them what to do, they don't feel that they have legal power and authority. They feel that mom has legal power and authority because that's how it's been their whole life. So practically, mom is still making decisions, even though in the court's eyes, the person has the power and authority to do so. Kind of makes sense? So navigating this, what's my vision for my child and what's my child's vision for them as early as possible, and creating a normal dialogue based on the skills of your child is super important and super healthy. And it can come down to really small, tiny steps or really big steps. Are you guys all familiar with the National Core Indicators? You guys ever heard of that? Okay, cool. National Core Indicators is a nationally wide project where what they're doing is they're trying to get consensus on outcomes for adults with disabilities through Medicaid waiver systems. And so they're looking at the Medicaid waiver systems, and they are interviewing caregivers, providers, and people served, and they're getting standardized metrics. So you can just go onto the website, you can put in your state, and then you can search at all of the questions, and you can see how your state stacks up to the average of services for all of the other states. And so this green one is actually Illinois, and this question is, has community employment as a goal in their service plan? So is community employment a goal in the service plan? And we see at a national level, we're hitting 25% of people have this as a goal, but in Illinois, we're quite a bit lower, which is interesting, right? And then we can look at some other questions that can show you data in bar graphs, that can show you data in table graphs. Here we have the type of residence. Own home or apartment, so they're living in their own home or apartment. They're not doing shared. 7% in Illinois, 12% nationally, so again, a little bit low on that. Parent or relative's home, 43% in Illinois, 45%. Foster care or host home, 1% in Illinois. Is that a pretty new model here for you guys, host home models? Are you guys familiar with that?
I've been around, honestly. I know it's been around for like 20 years. I don't know
Yeah.
if it's been around longer than that.
Yeah.
Awareness of it, but
I was curious because 1%, that's very underutilized, so I was curious about that too.
I live in Peoria, Illinois,
Yeah,
which is about an hour from here, and in Peoria we have an organization that does do
just do host homes.
yeah. And they advertise it. I have a friend who I used to work with who's a doctor who has a daughter that lives in a host home.
Yeah,
Has lived in a host home as an adult, and they love that
yeah,
program for her. But yeah, there's only one organization that does it there.
that makes sense. All right, I was just curious about that because I was like, that's a big gap. I know 1%, 3% seems really close, but when you think in large statistical, yeah, a lot of providers have been transitioning to host home models because there's some really good benefits to community participation and engagement, and with the turnover problems that kind of happened, right before the pandemic and then during the pandemic, there's a lot of, if you have somebody who has really individualized care and you have frontline staff who are leaving every 30 to 60 days, it's really hard to get them to the point where they can provide individualized care. So there's been a lot of expansion to host home models in the last 10 years for that reason, is that it standardizes that. So this is just some of the fun data that you can get in the National Core Indicators. I definitely recommend you guys going and checking out the National Core Indicators and kind of looking at the questions and which questions are relevant to you and your work and your life, and just kind of looking at, hey, how do we stack up to the rest of the country and where are our services in context? Because it can be very hard to understand how your services look in comparison to the rest of the country. So with that, even in the National Core Indicator, some of the things that I think are missing in there is diversity and understanding of the types of meaningful community engagement and contact that can exist across service types. So I tried to create, when we created a career readiness program back in 2012, that was really focused on taking people who were in non-competitive wages, so they were in sub-minimum wage, and they were doing piece rate assembly mainly, or they were in rehabilitation, but they had expressed interest that they wanted to work, but they didn't know how to get into work. We created a short-term program that was a 90-day program that kind of did skill assessment, volunteerism in the community, and then active engagement and job exploration and job searching, and then placement into community-based work of their choosing. And in doing that, we wanted to look at what were the opportunities for volunteer activities that existed in our community. We kind of came up with a couple of different subtypes. So the first one is active one-time service. Anyone know what I mean by active one-time service?
Like serving in a soup kitchen.
Yeah, so serving in a soup kitchen can be like, if you just sign up for one day, it can be that. Oftentimes the soup kitchen really hopes that you're going to become a reoccurring service, right? And you're going to like kind of come once a week or once a month. But like community cleanup days, where it's literally there's only one day that you can do this. And it's like on 4/20, we're going to all get together at the park and we're going to clean up the park and register if you want to. Tours and immersive learning. So this would be when you go out and you actively just view and see and get to learn about things that exist in your community. Reoccurring actions in the community. So this can just be going out to, once a week there's Tai Chi in the park. It's not really service oriented, but it is something that happens reliably and it has a shared goal and a shared group. One-time leisure in the community, so this is just like we're going out to the movies, right? We're only gonna go see that one movie. I might go out to the movies every week, but I'm picking a different movie, and it's not really quintessential that it's a weekly thing. That might be a preference, though. Daily living in the community, so this is going grocery shopping, this is running our errands, doing all that sort of stuff. And then reoccurring services, so this could be like signing up for those shifts in the soup kitchen, or signing up for shifts at Catholic Charities, thrift store, or whatever those sorts of things may be. So there's quite a lot of data out there on there's huge benefits of volunteering before the age of 18. There's 50% less likelihood to abuse drugs, alcohol, nicotine, or have an unplanned child. More likely to be employed and more likely to graduate high school and college. So these are general outcomes, and this literature base is not focused on autistic people or people with intellectual disabilities. This is just for everybody, and it includes autistic people and people with intellectual disabilities. They don't take them out of the data sets. They're just looking at people who volunteer in the world versus people who don't volunteer in the world. Where are they at 10 years later? And so the question there is, how many youth with disabilities versus youth without documented disabilities do they have equal access to volunteering? And 48% for youth with disabilities and 56% for youth without disabilities. Interestingly, where do you think the 48% of youth with disabilities actually get their disability or get their volunteer experience? How do you think they get that?
How do they get it?
Yeah.
From other people?
Yeah, what other people?
Their parents or their caregiver?
The majority of them are getting it from their SPED programs. They're getting it from their school supports. That's where the majority of them come from. So the other people are very targeted other people, mainly from school-based supports. Versus the 56%, the majority of children who don't have a diagnosis don't have volunteer-related school supports, right? They're doing it an extra to get ready for college. They're doing it because it's valued by their family, because it's an expected thing of their community or their culture. It's part of their church. So one of the things that this article kind of did was it kind of broke down the logic and the reason of why. So you can think about that 48% as this is part of just your normal school experience, and that 56% is primarily there's additional reason and cause and logic behind it that the child connects to. For the next question that I kind of have about volunteer experience is, okay, if volunteer experience is good, it leads to really good outcomes, and just logically, the idea that if you volunteer, you're meeting new people, you're learning new things, and you're doing something proactive and productive for your community, right? Which is pretty cool. Do children with disabilities who do volunteer, do they have a good time doing it? Right? Not is it fun, but do they experience discrimination, hardship, differentiation during that experience? And I see some head shaking. Yeah, a lot of them will. And some of the barriers that were brought up in that article are transportation barriers, that they had a really good time, they were having fun, but they couldn't get to and from the place. Access, it wasn't available at the time that it was available because they have special programs that they need to go to after school. Their calendar is a lot fuller than a lot of other people. And then perception of supervisor. So I went there, I did it, but people didn't think I could do it. They kind of told me to go do the little stuff that was below my skill sets, and they let all my peers do all the harder things, which is a sad reality for the perception that people with disabilities oftentimes face. So kind of what we can do with this is we can understand the types of opportunities that align with their outcomes and your outcomes. So in that visioning exercise, when we vision, hey, where do I realistically think that my loved one or the person I support is going to be in 20 years, and where do they want to be in 20 years? We need to find volunteer opportunities and activities that make the person feel valued and like they're on the path of that, right? So if the person says, I want to be YouTube famous and I want to be a streamer in 20 years playing video games, what are the volunteer opportunities that align with that vision? It's not an easy question. It's a complicated question. But does providing soup at a soup kitchen align with that? Probably not. Not at face value. Are there some things that could, right? Like, hey, if you're going to be talking to people, you feel really uncomfortable talking to people. And if you're going to be streaming, you got to talk a lot about what you're doing. So the soup kitchen might get you more comfortable talking about people. That's a really clear reason and a really clear goal that's tied to their reason. So with a little bit of logical extension, we might be able to pull some things out, right? But once they get good at talking to people, now they got to move on and do something else that builds another skill. Understand the progression to minimal levels of support. So, oftentimes, especially in services, we will talk about, we want them to do this more and more independently, but we don't really think about the steps that it takes to get to independence. What that means is we have to be super clear on what level of support we provide in the beginning and where we want to get at the end. So onboarding is a natural part of doing anything new, right? And one of the things that I like to think about is when we pick volunteer activities, try to find volunteer activities that have typical onboarding. So there's somebody who teaches you how to do this. They have a standard approach that they go about structuring their volunteer activities. I prefer those organizations to organizations where it's like just show up and help out because it gives us something to fade off of the staff onto, and it allows the person to have expectations that everybody else around them has. Does that kind of make sense? So when we start to do that, when we start to step back and we start to fade out, we want to understand, hey, what makes somebody a good volunteer here? What makes somebody a new volunteer here? What makes somebody a really bad volunteer here? If we don't know that, we can't figure out points to fade out support. Does that make logical sense to you guys? Awesome. So advocacy within opportunities. Where will my child start and what are the opportunities to where he will end with each volunteer location? So the same thing about understanding the points to fade out supports, we also have to understand, is there room for growth and progression in this volunteer activity, right? So if you're making soup and you're just, hey, there's only one job that soup volunteers can do, and that's stand at the counter and pour bowls and soup, there's no progression there. If there's opportunities that, hey, we actually have people who have to do all of the shopping and they have to do all of the planning and they have to contact other food banks and get all of this, there's a huge growth opportunity there, right? To go from directly handing out soup to going to plan resources, that's a pretty valuable, cool skill. And so the more that we can understand of what that volunteer organization has to offer, the more that we can help the person see their own skill growth over time. Especially if the child is doing this as part of their school services, and this is really more on the parent side, but if you're working in services with younger children, children who are going to school and they're volunteering as part of their special education programs, we want to try to find what they like doing from those volunteer opportunities, and the real goal is, can we get them to do it outside of their school support? So if they're volunteering at a place that they love, at a food bank, is that food bank open any other time? And how do children become volunteers? Can we get you to move from being a volunteer with your school to being a volunteer on your own hours? Because if that child could now get dropped off by mom or dad at a place that isn't offering them services to do something independently for the first time in their life, they've got the majority of skills that they're going to need to work. If they can do that, they can literally go get a job when they're eligible and qualified. And so if we can grow what they learned in the school with that specific volunteer opportunity to move it to how to functionally be independent in society, you've got really good room for movement of skill sets. And does the volunteer site have a standalone volunteer program? So again, if they have a preset volunteer program, now our goal should be to get the child to choose one of those, not all of them, but one of those to move into. Can they do this during summer break? Can they do this after school? Can they do it when they graduate? Now, if some hiccup happens and there's not resources or programs available when they graduate, they'll at least have something they can do a couple days a week to stay engaged with the world around them. That kid's gonna have a big leg up over a lot of other people in their same situation. Understand the skills required for success for the ideal outcomes of your child and their current skills. So sometimes when we're thinking about what our child, our loved one, our clients, what their vision of the future are, we jump really quick to there's no way that they're ever going to be able to do that. And realistically, that's not our role. Our role is to allow them to take an honest try and doing what they want to do that isn't going to hurt anybody else. So it's not our role to say that, hey, you can't be YouTube famous. Our role is, what does it take to become YouTube famous and how do you get there? And if you try your best, I'm here to support you in any way that I can within my role. But you don't know. You don't know if they can be YouTube famous or not. You have no idea. Is it the most likely thing in the world? Probably not, but that's true of anyone who wants to be YouTube famous. How do you make sense of skills that your child currently has and the path forward to the skills they can leverage to make their vision a reality? I think this is a really hard question. I think good skill assessment is severely lacking, and understanding skills in context is really confused right now in services in general. Macro versus micro orientation to skill sets. Anyone have any idea what I'm talking about here? No? Good, I like that, honesty. You guys got any idea? No? Okay, good. Consensus, Mark is crazy. That's okay. A macro orientation is usually outcome focused. So if I say, hey, does Mark have the skill to go to a job? We just look at, is Mark going to a job or not? And if I don't have a job, the answer is going to be nope, he doesn't have the skill. A micro is breaking down all of the components that a person who can do that can do. So there's a lot of skills related to going to a job, right? One, there's being able to perform a task for an extended period of time. There's being able to get from point A to point B. There's being able to communicate your wellness. Are you good enough to work? Are you not good enough to work? There's the ability to communicate and identify your own skill sets and preferences. There's the ability to work collaboratively with other people. Kind of see how that list just keeps going and going and going and going? So if you get hyper-focused on the macro skill of working, the answer is just no. And then the question is, where do we start? If you have a good breakdown of the micro skills, all of the components go into that big activity, then you can say, hey, Mark can do like 20 of these things. He can't do this, 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 and this yet. How do we take those 20 he can do to get him to be able to do those 15 that he can't do? Kind of see how your task is really clear when you start looking at the subcomponents of skills, and it stops us from identifying they're just not able to. They just can't. So direct assessment, questionnaires, surveys, and overall assessments for adult-based skills. There's a couple ones that I kind of like out there. I told you guys in the beginning I made one, and obviously that's the one I like the best. But there's some nice free resources out there. Have any of you guys used this before, the SDI-PTR self-determination inventory self-report? It's a free resource from Kansas University, and the link is this hyperlink. So when you guys go into the Behavior Live portal and you download the PowerPoint, you can just click that, or you can just look up SDI-PTR and you'll find the free resource. But it just asks questions that either a caregiver, a loved one, or another support network member can fill out, or you can have the person themselves fill it out. There's kind of multiple different versions. This is actually my real one. Like, I actually just did this for myself. I have a master's degree, I'm a director, I created things, I'm a parent to 2 daughters, I like to think a pretty good partner. I got some skills, but my self-advocacy and my self-determination skills aren't the best. As you can see, I'm hitting about mid-ground on all of them. which I like. I don't like tools for adults where their staff are going to look like they have 100%. They have all the skills. I want it to be differentiated that, hey, we aren't perfect either, and you don't need to be perfect to be good. You can have some skill deficits and still live a meaningful, good life. That's a real thing. So it breaks it down in this decide, act, and believe category, and then it gives you this cool little report. And so it says, yeah.
So it says self-determination, and then right at the other page it said parent-teacher report.
Yeah.
So do parents and teachers fill it out for them?
You can do either, yeah. So there's multiple versions. So you can do a parent one, or you can do the person served as their own, or you can do both, yeah. That's actually one of my favorite ways to do it when you're working on an adult service team and the person has different wants than their parent, especially if it's a guardian situation, is you have to create space that makes it really clear that they're on different pages. And so if you get both of the same instrument, you can see where the overlap and the disconnect is, and it really opens up a good conversation. So it breaks it down a little bit and says actions the student may take, and then skills the student may use. So really leveraging those strengths of like, hey, according to our results, you're able to engage in choice and decision making, but you might want to work on knowing your strengths and areas of need, and you might want to work on solving problems and working towards goals and thinking about different pathways to move through barriers.
Is this for like a certain age group or like based on?
Yeah, so you put all of that in there, and then I don't think it differentiates questions based on what you put in. I think it's standardized, which is a little bit not my favorite thing. But you do put in the age, and I would hope that they're kind of capping at age, but honestly, I don't know because I didn't make this one. But I do think like if you're anywhere in the 13 to 15 and up category, like this is 100% fair game. I did do one for my 10-year-old, and it was like pretty close. It was pretty good. It didn't really say anything crazy, so worked with her. And then our generated assessment, this is how we look at data. We call it a skillgram. So instead of comparing the person to an arbitrary, like, hey, what do all the 6-year-olds in the world do if the child is 6? We pick an individual milestone. So this one is, this person wanted to stay home alone. They were living in 24-hour care homes for about 10 years at this point. They'd never been able to stay home alone. And everybody always said it was safety skills, safety skills, safety skills. And when we actually looked at their skills and abilities, we saw that they were way over-skilled. So one of the cool things about our skillgram is it lets you show where overages happen to a milestone. Usually, if we're just sitting around the table and I'm scared of leaving my child home alone, I might say something like, well, they have never had to call 911 before. And it's like, well, how many people have called 911 before they stay home alone for the first time? Almost none. Almost nobody has ever done that in the history of people. So we can make up lots of reasons. We're very good reason makers. We can just keep making up reasons all day long. So we need boundaries for that sort of stuff. And so here, this person was actually overskilled. So it wasn't that they needed a skill program to show over the next years that they can do X, Y, and Z. It was we need to have a realistic conversation about what do we do to make this a reality for this person. So maximizing volunteer opportunities. Understand the types of tasks your child performs. So by knowing the things that they like to do and the things that they're good at, we should look at where in the community could benefit from that. Where can those skills give value back to the world around them? You know, one thing that I didn't talk too much about in here yet is that the reality of people with disabilities is that they are viewed and considered as a burden on society. None of us want to say that. None of us believe that at all. But the reality is that the world sees people with disabilities as a burden and an extra set of people who need resources that the rest of the population don't need, and they get more than other people, and it's unfair. It's sad. It's sad that that's a perception of the world in which we live. But the way I choose to fight that is to allow people with disabilities to show their value and establish their value, and show that they can do some things better than other people. and that they can give to their world around them just like the world around them gives. That it can be equivalent in a sense that our society also benefits from people with disabilities in ways that we don't even know how to talk about. We don't know how to talk about the value that a child who shows their family that individuality is important gives back to 15, 20, 30, 40 years later to all the people whose lives they touch. It's a really weird, abstract thing, and we don't know how to frame that yet. But what we can frame is that, hey, if people with disabilities become visible, valued members of their world, and they're able to give to someone else, that then the world starts to see that, and they start to feel that, and they start to understand that in a pretty concrete way. Understand all options for volunteers in the organizations. Identify opportunities to build relationships. So again, another thing that's pretty common is when we do create volunteer opportunities for people with disabilities, they're oftentimes just doing the volunteer activity and there's no social interaction that's happening. So how do we ensure that social interaction is happening? Well, one, if you're going with a group of people in a professional service relationship, you gotta step out of being the point of contact. They shouldn't come to you when they need something. They need to go to whoever a normal volunteer would go to. Who are they gonna talk to? And you might help them when they come to you and they say, I'm out of gloves, Mark. You might say, okay, cool. Who's the supervisor here? Oh, that's Sally. Okay, what can you do? Oh, I can go talk to Sally. Okay, go talk to Sally. If we just solve that problem, we're actually becoming the problem. We're stopping the communication, the interaction, the reliancy. Part of that is because as professionals, we're thankful that they're letting us be there, and we don't want to become a burden, and we don't want to lose that opportunity. But if we're not getting the full experience by that fear, then we gotta step back out of the fear to get the full experience. Identify opportunities to expand relationship beyond service relation. So if somebody really loves volunteering there, how can they do it outside of our organization? How can they do it independently? And then select and review outcome-based monitoring. How do we know if they're getting better at this? How do we know if they like it? How do we know if they're learning from it, if they're creating social interactions and meaningful relationships? Has it led to them going and doing anything with anybody outside of that program? Have they been invited to the movies? Have they been able to go to the park with somebody? Whatever they like to do. So again, targeted towards families, but one thing that I definitely advocate for is doing it together as a family 1 to 5 hours per week and kind of looking at the unit of, hey, where do we want to volunteer together and making that a normal part of life. Find a program that supports it, match skill interests with the community opportunities, join a career readiness camp or program with this as a goal, join service-based youth groups, and cascade skills as a child becomes more comfortable with an experience. Resources, so if you're having a hard time even knowing about volunteer resources, there's a bunch of really good aggregate platforms out there now. So Volunteer Match kind of has a nice breakdown of where it's like sub-industry types, and you say, I'm interested in this, and then you just click on that, and it shows you all the volunteer organizations within a certain radius from you. So that one's really great if you're just trying to brainstorm. The next one, Autism ADHD Connection, really gives a good overview of what benefits come from volunteerism if you kind of need any help trying to talk anybody into it or advocating for any organizations that kind of open up their volunteerism activities. That's a really good one for that. And then some disability advocacy stuff, some self-determination. That's that assessment link that we went over earlier, and then a link to the National Core Indicators if you wanted to check that out. And then just some good articles. If you like to kind of read articles, this is what the majority of this is built upon. So feel free to check those out. I tried to pick ones that were open source and accessible so you didn't get stuck behind any annoying paywalls, because that always frustrates me. Right. And that's pretty much all I got for you guys. A couple minutes early. Anyone, I mean, we've kind of just been talking, but any thoughts, questions, comments? Yeah. And to be fair, on the national level, we are the highest percentage we've ever been at. Over the last 10 years, we've grown about 3%. And so a lot of the efforts and the resources that have been being put into community-based programs are starting to kind of show that that differential is kind of going in a better direction. It's still significantly below where it could and needs to be, but we are moving it. Awesome.
I bet it's even higher than that, honestly, like, because, I mean, if you don't identify or report your disability to your employer,
Yeah.
which you don't have to do,
Yeah.
unless for some reason, you know, at some point you need an accommodation.
I did it for 6 years, and I work in disability services.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
So I hear you.
There's probably so many of us, I have ADHD, you know, I don't ever really report that.
Yeah.
Not the form. I mean, my employer's always a no.
Yeah.
But like, I don't fill out the form when they ask me that question. I don't ever mark yes,
Yeah.
you know? So there's probably so many people out there that are still working, but it's the individuals that have more severe,
Uh-huh.
you know, disabilities that struggle to get like the community workshops that close in our area, like because they lose the funding and it's hard to keep them open. You know, where are you from? I live in Peoria.
Oh, okay.
Do you guys, are you from Springfield?
No, we're from Jacksonville.
My stepmom lives in Creekwood.
Yep.
Right on the, I like to tell, right on the road to Coochie's on the water.
Oh, yeah. That's sad.
Because we don't have a lot of businesses in Jacksonville that support that at all.
I mean, we have a lot of agencies in Jacksonville that have developmental disabilities, but not the resources for them.
Yeah.
We've been trying to hire a job coach for,
About 7 months now.
yeah.
And nobody, and it's not that nobody doesn't want it. It's unfortunately, I think it's from where we're at, you're just at a sit still because nobody unfortunately will open the door to that opportunity to any of our guys. So I think we only have a handful that work. 3. I have 1.
I have one.
I think that's all.
And maybe,
Out of
like,
12
maybe this is the
referrals.
bridge, you know what I mean? Like, you're kind of saying, like, using the volunteering as an opportunity
Right.
to build the skills, and build the skills, and show that, like, you know, you can do more,
Yeah.
you know, and make it become something that can be
Yeah.
employable, if that's what they want, and that's what the individual.
Well, and even like how you frame the data on employment of people with disabilities. Like one thing that people don't understand is there's really good data out there that the average person with a disability stays in their job for 3 to 7 years. And you're talking about jobs with 90-day turnover. So if you go to an employer and you say, hey, be nice, hire this person with a disability, you're approaching it wrong. It's, hey, are you tired of turning over people? I can find you someone who's gonna stay, and it's gonna save you 5 hires, right? The value add right there is like, for real, you can save me 5 hires.
This conversation, one of my guys works at McDonald's.
Yeah.
He's been there for 7 years.
Uh-huh.
Every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and has missed 2 days.
Yeah.
And they were because of doctor appointments or Special Olympics.
That doesn't even count, yeah.
And he just recently missed one last
Yeah.
week for Special Olympics.
Yeah.
He was like, "Sure, I gotta go."
Good.
I said, "Yes, you do.
Yeah, good.
Go play.
Yeah.
Go play."
And that value of like how much money has that McDonald's saved
Yeah.
by retaining that person for 7 years, right? Like being able to put a dollar amount to that is like, hey, if McDonald's claims it costs them $3,000 to hire a new employee, the average employee turns over every 4 months.
Yes.
That's saving $9,000 per year. Multiply that by 7, he's saved that individual McDonald's store $63,000. And so getting language about that when you go about and you start doing this and figuring out what's important to the employer, not what's important to us, right? What's important to an employer and how do you talk at the language of that employer is one of the ways that, you know, I like to approach it. And the other is making it visible and valuable so that when managers of these stores are going out and they see a person with disabilities doing something that looks hard and cool, now their perception of what they're capable of starts to change.
Because I do think that's how it is.
Yeah.
I just like the word judgment. There's
Yeah.
a huge judgment against people with disabilities, and it's just ridiculous.
I have an individual that's worked at one
Yep.
Or before she was doing like the grill, she was learning all that stuff.
Yep. So anything that we can do to try to change that perception in society is the slow wins to reality. You know. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you.
Oops. This is in my computer.
So the organization that you work for, is that this is primarily what you do within your organization?
Historically, it was.
Yeah.